Howdy guys, and welcome to another episode in my Encounter Workshop series. Today I have 9 new encounters that you can utilize in a hill environment for levels 1 through 3. And these encounters come in 2 different difficulty levels, regular and elite. They already come pre-balanced using my balancing methodology, which you can check out here if you're interested in that. And feel free to check out the timestamps in the description down below to easily navigate to whichever encounter you're looking for. But let's not waste any more time and go ahead and jump into our first encounter for level 1. For our first regular encounter at level 1, we're going to be using 4 Neogi hatchlings. Now, if you've played StarCraft and you know about the Zerg, the Neogi are essentially Zergs, and I like to treat them as such. Meaning that these Neogi hatchlings are actually going to be a big prelude to future encounters you can give your party in these hills. So for this encounter specifically, I would recommend having your party come across a random lump of flesh in the hills as they notice a bunch of these weird hatchling creatures explode out of it and start rampaging, eating everything they can in sight. Neogi hatchlings aren't very intelligent initially, but they know one thing and one thing only. Their one sole purpose in life is to consume, evolve, and grow their colony. So whenever they hatch right next to your party, all they're going to do is attack the nearest target, completely swarming them like a bunch of little Zerglings, but not as dangerous as Zerglings themselves. Now, this shouldn't be too difficult for your party to handle, as the most deadly part about the Neogi is the poison damage in their bite attack. But what this encounter should do is definitely foreshadow a growing infestation and a possible outbreak that your party might have to deal with if they don't manage to kill off all these hatchlings and find the rest of their nest. For our next regular encounter at level 1, we have 1 Hippogriff. Now, there are 2 different ways you can approach this encounter for your party. There's a simple, straightforward way, or there's the foreboding and foreshadowing way. If you're going to go with the simple, straightforward way, I would say to have the Hippogriff only really attack the party because they got a little bit too close to its nest and is trying to defend its newborn young. They can either kill the Hippogriff itself or try to befriend it and communicate with it, letting it know that they're not any danger and they're not trying to harm its young. So there's a peaceful route for this one. However, if you're going to go with the foreshadowing and foreboding method, then this is where things change significantly. Instead of it being a truly wild Hippogriff, it's going to be a trained Hippogriff that has escaped and become hostile towards people, with the local Hippogriff trainer kind of tasking the party with finding their missing Hippogriffs and try to return them back to their farm. So as the party is going to investigate and track down the missing Hippogriff so they can return them back to their trainer, and that's when they find the source and the reason why these Hippogriffs are going crazy and trying to escape. They're going to find evidence of either a dragon activity, a griffin nearby, or other type of wyverns that are living or moving into the area. In terms of tactics specifically for the Hippogriff fights, it isn't going to change whichever option you decide to go with in this encounter. It's going to fight fairly straightforwardly, attacking the nearest player to it, using its beaks and claw attacks over and over. I would say though that in the situation where it's defending its young, try to treat it a little bit more viciously and not let it go too far away from where its nest is, so it kind of stays within like a 60-foot radius of a certain point. While in the foreboding situation, that's when you have the Hippogriff be a little bit more aloof, trying to escape way more than it is trying to fight them. So it is trying to backtrack as much as it can during the entire encounter. For our elite encounter at level 1, we're going to be using 1 Periton. Now, what makes this encounter so unique is the fact that they have a specific target priority based on their diet from their lore. But before I get more into that, let's talk about the quest to give your party so they can actually interact and hunt down one of these Peritons. So if it isn't obvious, you're going to be tasking your party with exterminating a Periton nest that is somewhere in the hills terrorizing a nearby town. And as your party goes through the hills, exploring and investigating, trying to find the Periton's nest, that's where they're going to encounter a random NPC, but more specifically, a haggard traveler that just barely escaped a recent attack from the Periton, which is currently hunting them. And this is where the target priority comes into play, because based on your party's composition of races, this will determine what race this traveler actually is. Because Peritons actually have a preferred diet of elves, half-elves, and then humans, eating every other humanoid race last. So if your party doesn't have any elves, definitely make the traveler either an elf or a half-elf. But if they do have an elf, then make the traveler either a half-elf or a human. That way they can kind of see that the Periton is focusing on different people in a different order. So now that we've talked about the quest that the party is being given and the target priority for the Parrington, let's talk about the actual tactics and how we're going to start this encounter. The first thing we have to take note of is which players actually have a passive perception of at least 12, because they're going to be the first ones to notice the Parrington attacking, as they're going to see a random humanoid shadow slowly getting bigger on the ground, because technically Parringtons give off a humanoid shadow instead of the normal monster shadow of their true form. So depending on which players manage to see the shadow and how they react, they're going to notice the Parrington use a dive bomb attack as their first action in this encounter. This dive bomb will obviously be targeting the Haggard Traveler that they found if it's a higher race priority, or the elf in the party. After that, the Parrington is going to attack them as normal on the ground, unless the party manages to hit them with a pretty strong attack in that first round. Then the Parrington is going to do a bunch of dive bomb attacks, constantly flying in and flying out, using their flyby ability to avoid any attacks of opportunity, allowing it to do so safely. Now, what makes this encounter truly dangerous and deadly though, is the fact that Parringtons actually have resistance to non-magical attacks, meaning this fight might last a little bit longer than your players are expecting, but it shouldn't be too bad. And if during the first round of combat, your party is able to do at least 15 points of damage, that's when the Parrington will actually switch up its tactics to a more hit and run strategy, using its flyby ability to easily avoid any attacks opportunity and constantly dive bomb one player over and over again. But if they don't do 15 points in one round, then the Parrington will stay on the ground and fight them normally. For our first regular encounter at level 2, we're going to be using 4 mud methods. If you've been following this series for a while now, you know I have a tendency to like to ambush my party and always surprise them with these encounters. Specifically because when I use a lot of minions, they tend to be a little bit more on the weaker side and have more gimmick type abilities. And the mud methods aren't any different. So for the setup for this encounter, I would say to have it be heavily raining as the party is navigating through the hills. That way there's mud piles everywhere, and the mud methods are able to hide amongst some of these mud piles to surprise the party as they get too close. I will also say that because we're going to be using a lot of mud and heavy rain in this encounter, make the giant mud piles difficult terrain as the party is trying to navigate through it. That way it's a little bit more difficult for your party to move out of range and let the methods use a little bit more of their restraining abilities, specifically their mud breath. It won't do any damage, but will just cover one of your players in a whole bunch of mud, completely restraining them until they can shake themselves out of it. Methods might not be the most intelligent of creatures, but they're also not stupid either, meaning when it comes to the tactics and their target priority in this encounter, they're going to be using all their restraining abilities like their mud breath on the biggest players first. That way they can focus on the squishier ones with their fist attacks. For our next regular encounter, we're going to be using 1 Dragonel. Now, this encounter is going to be very similar to the Hippogriff encounter. However, the key difference is the Dragonel will immediately start using hit and run tactics, constantly using its flyby ability. But let's spice things up just a little bit for the Dragonels, and I'll give you 2 different ways that you can actually start this encounter. The first one is very straightforward. Have it just be a regular wild Dragonel that's attacking the party and just kind of pecking at them as it's trying to feast, with there being a little opportunity for your party to potentially find the Dragonel's nest and find one of the eggs. That way they can train it up and use it as a flying mount later on. While the second setup is a little bit more intricate and in my opinion a lot more fun. Instead, as they're navigating through the hills, that's when they come across a small little bandit encampment. But these bandits aren't going to be regular bandits. Every single one of them is going to only have 2 or 5 HP, meaning they can be killed very easily and very quickly, with only one of the bandits actually having their full normal HP. This is the bandit that upon being attacked will release a shrill whistle in round 1, calling its Dragonel companion. Now, the Dragonel will not show up in time to actually save the bandits, but will show up at the end of the round when the final bandit has fallen, letting it witness the party deal the killing blow to its master, throwing the Dragonel into a blinding rage as it tries to avenge its master, doing everything it can to take down the party. However, if your party hasn't encountered Dragonels or any type of dragons yet in this campaign, I would actually recommend this second method instead, because it can open up an opportunity to show your party that Dragonels can be used as flying mounts and have a fierce sense of loyalty for their masters. So for our elite encounter at level 2, we're going to be using 1 Niyogi Master. Now, I would highly recommend that if you're going to use the Niyogi Master at level 2, that you do use the Hatchlings at level 1 at least once. That way it can foreshadow a little bit of the grander scheme of what's to come if your party doesn't succeed on this quest. and the quest specifically being given to your party being the missing people of a nearby town. As your party tries to find the traces of these missing people, that's where we're going to come across part of the Nyogi nest. However, the parts they're going to encounter are going to be mostly empty on the outskirts of it. They're going to see tons of cages and carcasses of the missing people reported from that village. And as they start to delve deeper into the nest, that's when they will see one of the missing villagers out and about working. And as the party tries to rescue this missing villager, that's when the Nyogi hidden nearby in the nest is going to try to attack the party with its Arms of Hadar ability. Or if it's only one person approaching the missing villager, that's when the Nyogi Master will instead use its Hold Person ability. That way it has a higher chance of beating them down with its Arms of Hadar. Once your party becomes wise of the Nyogi Master's location, that's when things really start to change. The Nyogi Master will do everything he can to try to stay at range using its Arms of Hadar ability, but should the party get a little bit too close, that's when it will use its Enslave bonus action to try to enslave whoever it thinks might be the biggest person that your party might have to deal with if it turns on them. This Nyogi Master throughout this encounter should also be trying to lead the party through its nest, trying to find other allies, but it shouldn't actually find any for this fight specifically. Otherwise, it becomes a little bit too deadly for a level 2 party. But after the party manages to defeat this Nyogi Master, they should have a strong appreciation of how large the nest truly is, making it really feel like the Zerg from StarCraft, with the Nyogi Masters being more like queens or infestors versus the Zergling nature of the hatchlings. For our first regular encounter at level 3, we're going to be using 4 Zorbos. Now, these little teddy bear monsters aren't what you think they might be. They're not these cute cuddly creatures that are friend-shaped. In fact, they're absolute nightmares for anyone wearing magical armor. Not just that though, but they have a really interesting gimmick that affects their AC via their natural armor ability. For the setup for this encounter, I highly recommend you have at least 2 of these things in the battlefield. That way you can alternate the Zorbo's AC throughout the entire encounter. The first AC threshold being 15, meaning you're going to need either some fallen tree logs throughout the battlefield or bone piles that the Zorbos can step on to adjust their AC appropriately. While the second threshold is going to be 17 by having your Zorbo step on rocks or climbing on giant boulders that are scattered throughout the hills. This ever-shifting AC change should keep your players on their toes as the Zorbo navigates between having a really low AC of 10 as it's walking along the normal grass path and 15 and 17 as it's touching trees and grabbing onto rocks. It is important to note though that the Zorbos aren't intelligent, they're only wise, meaning they'll have the wisdom to know that if they're next to a boulder or next to a pile of bones or a fallen log, that they should probably step on that first or interact with that first before they attack the party member so they can adjust their AC up. But they're not going to expertly know how to push any of the players into any of these areas. That way they can give themselves a higher survivability. But like I mentioned earlier, if it wasn't bad enough that the Zorbo AC can get astronomically high at 17 or if not 19 if you want to have metal nodes scattered throughout the battlefield, the Zorbo can also completely destroy magical armor with every single claw attack it does. Meaning your heavy plate wearers are going to have a high chance of losing their magical armor if they keep failing their dexterity saving throws, giving most armor pieces on average about 2 to 3 failed saves before they become completely broken and absolutely useless. And that, I think, is what makes this encounter so deadly, not to the players themselves, but to their wallets. For our next regular encounter at level 3, we have 1 Nyogi. Now, if the hatchlings were Zerglings and the Nyogi Masters were essentially queens or infestors, what does that make the Nyogi? Pretty much a roach. These guys are a perfect middle ground between the hatchlings and the masters, which is also represented in their size categories. The hatchlings being tiny, the masters being medium, and the Nyogis just being small. Now, unlike the masters, regular Nyogi don't have any ranged abilities, but their strong poison attack with each of their bites should be deadly enough, on top of the fact that the regular Nyogi can also still use the Enslave ability as a bonus action once during this encounter. So if you couple these 2 things together, charming the tank and using its bite attack on anyone near the tank, this should be a fairly challenging encounter. But to make things a little bit more challenging for your party, because there's only 1 Nyogi in this fight, I would highly recommend that you have essentially your own version of creep spread throughout the nest where they're going to encounter this Nyogi in the hills. meaning anywhere that the party is actually navigating on this creep or on whatever you want to call it, they actually move as if they're in difficult terrain, making it a little bit more fair for the Neogi because it has a fairly low HP pool at only 33 to have to square up against 4 different players. When it comes to any other additional tactics for the Neogi, it should play fairly similarly to the Masters, but maybe without as much precision, as regular Neogi only have above average intelligence, meaning they can identify who the tank is and who the casters are, and understand that the casters are probably be a little bit easier to munch on. For our elite encounter at level 3, we're going to be using one Dragon Flesh Abomination. Now, this monster is quite deadly for 2 main reasons. Its Clone Miasma ability, which gives the poison condition to any creature next to it every single round, and its fairly strong regeneration, which regenerates 10 HP every single turn with no way to stop it. But before we break down the rest of its stat block and its tactics, let's talk about the quest to give your party to hunt down one of these Dragon Flesh Abominations. I would recommend giving your party an extermination quest for the dragon cultists that have been terrorizing nearby towns. And as they investigate the hills, that's when they find the keep, or the main hideout for these dragon cultists. But as they enter the hideout and look around, they see a bunch of bodies strewn all around the area. But not just any regular bodies. Each one of these bodies is malformed and slightly mutated, looking like they were grafted with dragon parts. But not just that, but the hideout itself also looks heavily damaged with acid damage everywhere. This should be all foreshadowing what your party is going to be encountering as they delve deeper into the hideout. Now, the actual start of this encounter can be done in one of 2 different ways. The party can approach the last cultist in the final moment, right before its final transformation finishes and it becomes the Dragon Flesh Abomination itself, or as we're navigating the hideout, that's when the Dragon Flesh Abomination bursts through the wall or a door like the Kool-Aid Man and surprising the party, rampaging on them with its significantly lowered intelligence, smelling the treasure that they're carrying and doing everything it can to try to gather it for its own new hoard. When it comes to the tactics that the Abomination is actually going to be using, it's going to be using its tail attack for any player that tries to get outside of its melee range, while using its spit attack on any of the backliners. And should any of the frontline melee fighters ever get a little bit too close together and are grouped up, that's when it will use its acid belch ability to try to get both of them with an acid spray. Aside from that, it's just pretty much going to mindlessly rampage about trying to destroy the party and cause as much damage as it can, because all it's looking for now is treasure to feed the greed that has been instilled in it from fusing itself with dragon parts. After everything is said and done, I would very much recommend to leave a whole bunch of unused dragon parts, whether it be bones, scales, or other components for the party to find. So if you found this video helpful and enjoyable, give this video a like and comment down below what are your favorite monsters to use in a hill environment. And if you'd like to see more encounters like this for levels 4 and 5, make sure you get subscribed so you don't miss out when I release that video. But yeah, see you guys next time.